Hello and welcome to Focus 54, your weekly guide to real African issues. I am your host for this week, Yvonne Mkondani. Now, the 77th African Commission session on human and people's rights is ongoing in Arusha, Tanzania, where critical discussions are taking place, aiming to protect and uphold the rights as well as the dignity of individuals across the continent. In today's episode, we explore more on humans and people's rights, unpacking the significance of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. But first, let me take you through the stories that have been making the headlines across the continent. Now we kickstart with a developing story as the African Union Commission Chair Musa Faki Mahamat was on Wednesday received by the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The meeting in Washington at the U.S. State Department opened the 9th annual US-AU Commission high-level dialogue and focused on the relationship between the United States and African states. The Secretary re-emphasized the United States' support for greater African representation in international institutions and congratulated the African Union on achieving permanent membership in the G20. And now let's move and take a look at Uganda, where the Ugandan government on Wednesday slammed the United States announcement that it would withdraw the country from a trade agreement because of human rights violations, saying the move would hurt its farmers as well as small businesses. Now, we know that Washington had announced that it was going to exclude Uganda, along with the Central African Republic, Gabon, and Niger, from the list of sub-Saharan countries benefiting from the African Growth and Opportunity Act from January 2024. Now from Uganda, let's move to Kenya, where a hydroelectric power plant led by the visionary Kenyan entrepreneur John Magiro has emerged as a beacon of sustainable energy in the heart of Kenya. Through innovative water diversion and hydropower generation, the hydroelectric power plant does not only improve the life of residents, but also aids businesses and schools. While minimizing environmental impacts, it stands as a model for regional energy development as well as electricity initiatives. Now, that's all we had for you in this segment. Do join us in the second segment as we're going to delve into the pressing issues that demand our attention. Human rights in Africa. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the second segment of Focus 54. I'm Yvonne Mkondani, and now I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Delis Mazambane, who is the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission Executive Secretary, as well as joining us virtually is Abigail Mupambi, a human rights defender, as well as a political analyst. Ladies, thank you for joining us. Thank you. I know you're joining us online, and Doc, you're with us in the studio. Thank you very much for making time to be with us on Focus 54.
Thank you for having me.
Now, getting into the conversation, let's look at the significance of the 77th Ordinary Session in terms of advancing human rights in Africa.
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, let me highlight what the African Commission is and what it does before we get into the 77th session. The African Commission is an organ of the African Union, which deals with issues of human rights, established in 1986 and is based in Banjul in the Gambia.
Right.
And it holds 4 ordinary sessions per year, and this is the final session for 2023. The significance of this 77th session is that it's coming after several virtual meetings, ordinary sessions that have been held because of COVID. So here people are meeting virtually in Arusha, Tanzania, and they are focusing especially on free trade. The African Free Continental Trade Area is topical because that's also the theme of the African Union for 2023. And issues of climate change are also topical. There's a study that was done by the Commission, and they have a report which they were consulting their stakeholders on to get feedback. And there was also the issue of the Maputo Protocol, focusing on women's rights. 20 years after adoption, where are we and what do we need to do to ensure that women in Africa have a peaceful existence? and also the usual stakeholder engagements with national human rights institutions, the commissions, civil society organizations, and other human rights defenders.
So you talked of the Maputo Protocol after and several other issues that are being looked at, but let's look at the general person, or maybe the woman at home. How far are people empowered, or how far do people know of these rights or these conventions or these things that you are talking about on their behalf?
Yes, efforts are actually being made by the government. If you are looking at Zimbabwe, the Minister of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs is the one that is responsible for issues of human rights. And Zimbabwe also has a national human rights institution, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. And we have civil society organizations that work in the human rights sector. So all these players have been playing a big role in ensuring human rights awareness. So you find that in most areas, even in the rural, marginalized communities, people have an understanding of human rights. And before the government goes to attend the ordinary session meetings, consultations are made so that people give their views on the status of human rights in Zimbabwe during the period that is being reported on. And the National Human Rights Institution, Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, also does its assessments and consultations, and also presents reports to the ordinary session.
So I'll still go back to the grassroots, because this is where the person who's affected most by these issues are. You mentioned that government as well as other relevant stakeholders are involved in consultation with the people, then generally then bring forth these issues for discussion. But let's look at issues, say, like climate change, a very pertinent issue, something that we cannot go on a day-to-day without having talked about. But in as far as these consultations are done, do you think the ordinary person at home can actually sit and say, climate change is really an issue that is very important? Because maybe people think when they hear human rights, people think of the basics, don't they?
They do, but actually you might actually be surprised. For the past 2-3 weeks, even the ordinary person on the street was talking about El Nino. And even the grannies in the rural areas, they have heard on the news, and they have also heard at ward meetings, community meetings, that there's something called El Nino that is going to affect the weather. We are not going to have adequate rains. And they would want to know what mitigation measures are being put in place. And is government going to guarantee food security if we do not have adequate rains? So we can actually underestimate the knowledge that our communities have. But I get you, we need to do more so that the trending or topical human rights issues like climate change actually get to be given prominence, and people know the implications in terms of realization of human rights.
But kudos to you and the team that you're working with, because if the general person really knows, it means there's enough conscientization going on. So let's look at the region. How far can we say maybe Africa has gone in advancing some of these issues and protecting these human rights that we're talking about?
If we're looking at Africa, there is a network of national human rights institutions, which is called NANRI. It has been doing extensive work to ensure that member states of the African Union, that is the governments and the human rights institutions, work together to ensure that their citizens are sensitized, because it's only a sensitized citizen that can demand accountability, promotion and protection of human rights from government, which is the duty bearer. So the duty is not just on the government or the state, but it's everyone's duty. That's why we also have human rights defenders, be they individuals or civil society organizations. You're watching Focus 54, and we mentioned earlier on that we're joined by Abigail Mupambi, who is joining us virtually. He will forgive us for having neglected you a little bit there, but kindly just give us your contribution on some of the matters that we've talked about so far.
Yvonne, let me take this opportunity today. First of all, the people need to understand what is the significance of the AU, which members have ratified or domesticated the Charter's demands in terms of the Commission. It will be interesting, of course, to note that when we talk of human rights, it's a broader jacket that he has got issues of political rights, economic rights, and also recognizing the interdependence of these rights as enshrined in the charter. But how far have we seen ourselves achieving? Can we self-introspect? And of course, member states, they meet regularly to check on the journey so far. Like we are already having the 77th session of the Commission is set for Tanzania.
Right. So I think I caught you before we crossed over to Abigail there to hear what it is that her contribution rather regarding this conversation. You were saying?
Yes, I was saying the role of promoting and protecting human rights. Mm-hmm. It's not a one person's responsibility. It's all of us who have a responsibility to ensure that human rights are promoted and protected. Mm-hmm. In terms of international human rights law, the duty to promote and protect human rights falls on the government, which represents us as the state, which is the duty bearer. But us as national human rights institution, civil society organizations, even individuals, they also have a duty to complement the role of government. Mm-hmm. If government is providing schools so that the right to education is promoted, then all of us also need to support by ensuring that we take our children to school. Mm-hmm. If they need stationery, if they need other resources that enable them to learn, then we should also come in.
So let's look at maybe the actions or the resolutions that can be taken by the Commission to address some of these challenges.
Yes, in terms of resolutions, they depend on the issues, on the matters that are on the agenda. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the issue of free trade, the African Continental Free Trade Area, this was adopted in 2018, but there's not been so much coordination in terms of its implementation and looking at the results and the benefits to the ordinary person. Mm-hmm. So there's emphasis that member states should collaborate with the different players, the civil society organizations, the national human rights institutions, so that it's translated into action. It does not become an abstract where you just know that there's some free trade area that has been created. Mm. But what is in it for me, maybe as a cross-border trader, how do I benefit from the Continental Free Trade Area? If is it just about goods? Is it about services? What exactly is it about? So there's need for unpacking of some of these human rights concepts so that they make sense to the ordinary person on the street.
Mm-hmm. Sorry to cut you. I just thought of something like, who sets this agenda? Who sets it?
The agenda is set through a consultative process. Mm-hmm. You look at the role of the African Commission. It gets submissions from different stakeholders. It gets reports from member states, mm-hmm. and some oral presentations are also made. So from all these issues that arise, the agenda for the next meeting is determined from those issues, because you actually see that these ones need to be deliberated on, or there may be need for research to take place, or there may be need for country visits for the African Commission, or maybe other mechanisms like special rapporteurs to come to a particular country and look at what the situation is like on the ground.
You're watching Focus 54. We take a short break. Join us when we return with more. Welcome back. This is Focus 54, and as we start off this third session, let's hear from Abigail Mupambi, who joins us.
It's always interesting to go deeper and say, what can we do to strengthen or to make sure that the African Commission on Human and People's Rights is made more effective? Because we have been having a number of analysts coming aboard and say Africa alone is failing to deal with its issues, to maybe contain its own issues. Maybe the organs of the African Union are a bit shaking, and what could be the causes? And I want, of course, to zero in and begin to talk about issues around the financing of the organs themselves. I think Africa needs to be very, very careful and begin to look inwards. Member states whose interests are represented by each and every organ of the African Union, and this commission also represented. The member states must be able to fully fund, wholly fund, if I may put it that way, the operations in particular of the organs of the African Union. The Commission has got a number of responsibilities. It is taking care of the complaints that may be raised by member states. It is taking care of the issues that may be raised by non-governmental organizations. It is actually, it has a court where such issues can actually be heard and dealt with, be it issues between states, member states, be it issues coming from NGOs against or linked to their respective member states. All those issues are interrogated within the systems of the human in the people's rights commission, African Commission.
Thank you very much, Abigail, for that contribution. Now, coming to you, Doc, taking from what she said, and then just moving into the theme for this year. How then does it fit into the African Continental Free Trade Area?
Yes, the African Continental Free Trade Area is, I would say, one of the major developments that have been attained on the continent. And it's one of the biggest free trade areas after the establishment of the World Trade Organization. So we are looking at this free trade area as contributing to the realization and enjoyment of socio-economic rights. Because we are talking about movement of goods, we are talking about also movement of services, where services can be imported or exported from one part of the continent to the other. And we are also talking about a new trend of business and human rights, where we are saying, as we are involved in trade, as we are involved in investment, we need to ensure that these corporates, these businesses are responsible, and they are also respecting the rights of the host communities. If we have a person moving from Zimbabwe to Malawi to Uganda, they need to respect the rights of the communities that they are passing through as they conduct their business, or those that they are engaging with as they conduct their businesses. So that's how the free trade area in business and human rights are linking, and also the general socio-economic rights. Because if you're looking at movement of services, we look at issues of transport, we look at issues of education. People are going to other countries to acquire education. We are looking at tourism, people going to tourist destinations across the continent. So all those issues, they have a bearing on enjoyment of socio-economic rights. People are benefiting from these business ventures, but there's also need to protect the rights of the people who are involved in these activities and who are based in the communities where the business activities are going to be taking place. Yeah.
Now, having said that, we cannot talk about the issue of human rights and not talk about xenophobia, issues to do with discrimination, the ill treatment of migrants in the various countries across the globe. How are you dealing with such issues as a commission, and how best do you think they should be dealt with moving forward?
There are actually guidelines in terms of international human rights law and also in terms of the human rights frameworks in the continent. If you look at the global level, we have the Global Compact on migration, which seeks to ensure that we have got safe and migration, and that people who are involved in migration at times not because of their own will. We've got refugees, we've got asylum seekers, we've got a whole host of people who migrate because of various reasons. They need protection. And we also have the diaspora community. They are also involved in this. What benefit should they bring to their own countries? What protection mechanisms should be available? And we, at the African level, we have a policy on migration, which also looks at labor migration, migration for purposes of education, displacements, whether internal or international. We're also looking at issues of the various other causes that result in migration, and looking at the strategies that should be adopted to ensure protection of these various groups. If you look at labor migration, the laws that are applicable to the citizens of a particular country, they may not actually benefit the migrant laborers because maybe they are not regular migrants, they do not have permits. So you may find that in terms of remuneration, they are underpaid because they are not regular, and they cannot go and complain maybe at the employment council or wherever because they are irregular and they can actually be deported. So there are a lot of human rights issues that come with that. And even in terms of students on permits, you find that at times their permits may not be renewed for various purposes, and it will disturb their education, where they will need to go back to their country and sort out the paperwork and then go back, and they might actually miss on the lessons if the institutions do not have online education. So all these strategies need to be adopted. And as Zimbabwe, in 2022, we actually held the first ever regional meeting on rights of migrants in SADC, where we invited chairpersons of human rights commissions in SADC to Harare, and we adopted the Harare Declaration, where we were saying, as SADC, we have been seeing a lot of Operation Dudula and different others in different African countries. So what do we need to do? And a resolution was made that, we need to put our heads together, unpack the reasons for the xenophobia, for the discrimination, for the attacks, so that we work together as one continent.
International law, they being part of it being explained by Dr. Mazambani, the protection of migrants, issues to do with xenophobia, the ill treatment of people in various countries, and so forth. Abigail, if there's anything that you want to say regarding that issue, or any other issues that we are discussing, please do chip in. Now, having listened to what she has said and what you were explaining earlier on, it just sounds like we're talking about, the issue of conflict and conflict resolution. Any other means and ways that maybe we can come up with to resolve conflict in the continent? Because this can actually then end up infringing on people's rights.
Yes, Africa actually has the African Peace and Security Architecture. It has a whole lot of institutions, policies, and procedures that should be followed in the event of conflicts. And you have noted that the Agenda 2063 has been placing emphasis on African solutions for African problems. And I think Zimbabwe bears witness to the relevance of this principle. In 2008, we had the political unrest and the electoral unrest that we had. And it saw the former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, coming in to mediate. So it was an African solution, and a brother coming in to assist another country which is having problems. And we ended up having the global political agreement. And this mediation has not just been taking place in Southern Africa. We have seen even in East Africa, Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania. The mediation has actually been de-escalating some of the tensions that could have escalated maybe into civil unrest or even wars. And we have also noted that in terms of de-escalation of conflicts, there's been a recommendation for adoption of a culture of human rights, constitutionalism, rule of law, good governance. Because if citizens are able to participate in governance, if they are able to communicate, if they are able to take part even in the selection and of their leaders, and also removal of their leaders lawfully, then you find that the tensions are actually going to be low, and if there are any issues that are there are fora and platforms where these can be discussed and issues can be resolved without resorting to conflict.
Without resorting to conflict.
Yeah.
And I know earlier on you touched a little bit on the Maputo Protocol, which is really significant in addressing challenges that are maybe gender-based human rights challenges are concerned. How far has this gone in protecting women and advancing their rights?
Yes, the Maputo Protocol is the African version of the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. But the beauty of the Maputo Protocol is that it has placed the focus on the African woman, who has issues that affect her, that may be different from those affecting an Asian woman or an European woman. We are looking at issues of harmful cultural practices. The Maputo Protocol has talked about that and placed an obligation on the member states to adopt administrative, policy, and legal measures to ensure that harmful cultural practice like forced and child marriages are eliminated. I think you remember the adoption of the model law on the elimination of child marriages some 5 years or so back. And after that, Zimbabwe, for example, in Zimbabwe, we now have a Marriage Act which outlaws child marriages. So those are some of the steps. It emanates from the human rights framework, whether it's international or at regional level. Then we now domesticate as a country, adopting the model law, then also having a particular law that protects the girl child from child marriages or even forced marriages.
Where is the boy child, the men, in this conversation? Do we have any treaties or protocols that speak to their protection?
They are not really those that are particular to men and the boy child, but the human rights instruments that are there, they are applicable to everyone. But there's been singling out of women and the girl child because of past injustices that were taking place and unfair discrimination against women. So it's more of trying to balance the playing field and offer more protection to vulnerable groups. I think we all agree that women and girls are much more vulnerable than the men and the boys. But we have noted recently that the boy child has also been vulnerable. Issues of child abuse, issues of bullying, issues of drug abuse, they have been topical. And there's need for deliberate efforts to ensure that there are also protection mechanisms for men and the boy child. For men, issues of domestic violence, men previously never used to report cases of domestic violence, but because of sensitization, awareness, and others, you'll find that we now have statistics of men that are also facing domestic violence, and even the police and the victim-friendly units, they are now sensitized to also handle these issues as a sensitivity to the rights of men and the boy child.
Now, as we come to draw towards the end, let's look at Tanzania as the host of this 77th Ordinary Session on the Advancement of Human Rights.
Yes, of interest is the fact that Tanzania was also the venue for the 6th National Human Rights Institutions Forum. So the participants that participate in this forum for national human rights institutions are more or less the same participants that would also need to attend the 77th Ordinary Session. So for me, it made sense for these events to be held side by side, and so that the participants could participate maybe across. If you need to participate in a session of the NHRI's forum, could participate. If you need to participate maybe in a discussion or panel meeting or of the African Commission session, you could also participate. So having the two held at the same place in the same country, it made a lot of sense.
All right.
Yeah.
Abigail, as we conclude, just your closing remarks regarding the 77th session on the advancement of human rights, which is being hosted by Tanzania. Anything at all that you'd want to say as we conclude? And I must thank you, Doc, for having joined us on the program today. We hope that hopefully we will have you back again at some point in the future.
Thank you for having me, and it would be a pleasure to be back.
Indeed.
Thank you.
And thank you for having joined us on Focus 54. Until we meet again, hopefully next week, pleasant viewing.